The Royal Borough of Dundee. This ancient walled port has grown over the centuries into a remarkable city which has borne witness to the ever-changing fortunes of Scotland as a nation.
The winter was howling o'er moor or mountain, wild was the surge on the dark rolling sea. When I met about daybreak a bonny young lassie, who asked me the road and the miles to Dundee. Said I, my young lassie,
Dundee's early history is shrouded in legends and myth, and its many claims to fame involve some of the most colourful characters of Scottish history. Not least is that William Wallace himself, while studying here as a young man in about the year 1290, struck his first blow for freedom against English oppression.
And gave me her arm, and a word did I speer for that lassie might be. She appeared like an angel in feature and form, as she walked by my side on the road to Dundee. At length we the house of Martin behind us, and spires o'er the town in full view we could see. She said, gentle sir, I can never forget ye, for showing me so far on the road to Dundee. This ring and this purse tack to prove I am faithful, and some simple token I'll trust you give me. And in times to come I will the laddie remember that showed me the road and the miles to Dundee. I took the gowpen frae the scarf on my bosom, and said, keep ye this in remembrance of me. And then bravely I kissed the sweet lips o' that lassie, and I parted wi' her on the road to Dundee. So here's to the lassie, I ne'er can forget her, and ilker young laddie that's listening to me. And ne'er be sweetie convoy a young lassie, though it's only to show her the road to Dundee.
Because of all the changes that are taking place, there are few structures left that are tangible reminders of Dundee's past. Those old film shots, you saw this arch, the Wishart Arch, and along with the old steeple at St Mary's are probably the only things left that remind us of Old Dundee. Yet, whatever Dundee is, or has ever been, the one silver thread that runs through all this is the River Tay.
Home of the wild goose, grey seal and eider duck, the estuary of the Tay cuts into Scotland's eastern seaboard for 20 miles. A broad inlet of North Sea tide and shifting sand between the county of Angus in the north and the kingdom of Fife in the south. Here, at the seaward end, stands the city of Dundee, apparently known as a lectum in pre-medieval times, which has been trading and sending its shipping overseas long before the time of Columbus. Like the nation in which it has taken its proud place, Dundee has accommodated enormous changes over the centuries, but certainly none more so than in the last 100 years.
Jute, jam and journalism. That's the phrase that has been Dundee for generations. The jute industry has employed huge numbers of Dundonians. The jam industry has served to feed them, whilst journalism, of course, has been there to entertain them. They say that nothing exists in isolation, and the rise of these three cornerstone industries has come about through a chain of activity in this favoured spot. However, it's not possible in this short video to cover the ancient past of this city. This is a trip down memory lane, a trip designed to evoke some of those memories that Dundonians living today can still remember.
There is little doubt that being a port has played a highly significant role in the prosperity of Dundee. Trade with foreign lands has been a huge stimulus for industrious citizens who have ever been keen to create wealth. Apart from the commerce that sprang from the port, the city has indeed seen a vast diversity of industry and trades, not least of which was shipbuilding and the shipping activity that resulted. One of the last wooden-hulled ships to be built in Dundee was the Discovery, the ship that took Captain Scott on his ill-fated journey to the South Pole. These workers coming off shift up Boatyard Brae are all part of the past traditions of building the ships which carried goods and products to far corners of the globe. Whale oil from the Arctic once fed the lamps and wheels of industry. Now the old square riggers have disappeared. This dangerous life of hunting the whale took a high toll on seamen's lives, and many a bairn in Ould Dundee could not grow up without the fear that their father would possibly never return from the cold Arctic waters. Industry today has other sources of oil, but the whaler has made his contribution. It was his oil that made it possible to process jute fibre from the Indian subcontinent, and so created a major staple industry and one of the city's most successful eras. A chapter in Dundee's 700-year-old history of textiles and weaving, which is still being written. Yet life for the workers in the early jute industry was far from easy. Many had come from the older weaving trades, from poor housing conditions, and were not in any position to demand sufficient wages to feed and clothe their families. The advent of the first Tay Bridge, however, allowed for easier access for coal from the mines of Fife, and together with the improved steam-powered machinery, the new-style jute mills created such wealth that Dundee became known as Jutopolis. Working conditions in the giant mills were far from that which modern society would accept these days, but the mill owners had all the power, and lads and lasses had to risk life and limb at times in becoming familiar with new machines and innovations in the spinning and weaving techniques. The mills generally employed large numbers of women, perhaps because of their nimble fingers that were needed in the intricate work, but more probably because they were paid much less than men. Apart from the physical risks which workers had to accept, sometimes from injury sustained through working in very close proximity to powerful machines, the long hours, against a background of poor sanitation and living conditions, made for a very unhealthy life for the majority of mill workers. Many a mill girl could be marked out through heavy scars sustained in accidents at work. Fatalities were not uncommon for a variety of reasons. Chronic illnesses abounded, and there were high risks to face in the workplace. There were few working weeks when there wasn't a fire to deal with in one mill or another. Handling of the jute, as here, produced an atmosphere heavily laden with dust and fibres. This was not only choking, but also highly flammable. In recognition of these problems, as well as pressure to provide appropriate services, the City Fathers supported the development of the Dundee Fire Brigade. These early shots show fire engines emerging from the station in Bell Street. The purpose, to put out fires, may not have changed, but certainly much of the equipment is very different these days. The hectic, demanding life in the mill may not have encouraged fashion-conscious mill girls to any great degree. The clothes worn were meant to be practical. But it's clear this girl is not looking for any romantic liaisons in her daily routine. Hard work, however, was the order of the day, and the hectic pace of production left little time for thoughts other than the job in hand. But let's have another look at that wonderful Granny Much cow. From the advent of steam power, the mills continued to improve their production methods as well as the transportation used. And the pace of production steadily increased in leaps and bounds, but the endless push for increased production took its toll in the attitudes of the general worker. Clock watching became the norm, and the sound of the hooter for the end of the shift was sweet harmony for those who drudged day in, day out in these dangerous places. The delight on the faces of these workers leaving Camperdown mills is evidence enough.
gangen fast. We shifters, can ye get the rest? Shift and bobbins coarse and fine, they fairly make you work for your 10 and 9. Oh dear me, I wish the day was done, running up and down the pass is nae fun. Shifting piece and spinning, work weft and twine, to feed and clean your berry, often 10 and 9. Oh dear me, the mill's ganning fast, we shifters, can ye get the rest? Shift and bobbins close and fine, they fairly make you work for your 10 and 9. Oh dear me, the world's ill divided, them that works the hardest are the least provided. I'm on bind contented, dark days of mine, there's nae much pleasure living, often 10 and 9. Oh dear me, the mill's ganning fast.
There were occasions that disrupted the tide of production. Not least was the general strike in the 1920s. Dundee did not escape the difficulties of these times, as this contemporary footage of trouble in the city shows. Mass unemployment had many a family trying to exist on charity handouts, and soup kitchens became commonplace. A small measure of recovery, however, did eventually come. At the outbreak of World War II, the demand for sacking for sandbags stimulated production. This began a steady period for the jute industry, leading to a measure of prosperity that had not been seen since the turn of the century. Payday became an occasion that opened the mind to many more possibilities for the mill worker, of which in past days they could only dream. With the rich farmlands of Perthshire and Angus to the north, and those of the Kingdom of Fife to the south, Dundee lies in the centre of one of the most fertile areas of Scotland. Not surprisingly, it has become a centre for the processing of locally grown fruit, particularly raspberries. Many are employed in this local industry. These youngsters, picking fruit in the fields, perhaps eating a little more than they pick, could enjoy the fresh air of the outdoors and find a summer adventure amongst the lines of brambles and canes. The rich soil produces luscious fruit, perhaps destined for the fruit canning factories. Much expertise has developed over the centuries in this area using local fruit produce. But with importation through the docks of oranges from all over the world, Dundee also became a capital for the production of marmalade. Good day to you.
What can I do for you?
Could I have a quart of Keeler's butterscotch?
Is that everything?
Thank you.
60p.
Right.
Thank you very
Much
much.
obliged.
Lovely.
Cheerio.
Thanks a lot. Goodbye.
Sadly, old sweetie shops like this nowadays are few and far between. But often, this type of business was a diversification of companies like Keeler's who wanted to find markets for their locally grown fruit. Now, I've got my poke of sweeties, and I think I might fancy one of Dundee's famous pies. But I need also something to read. After jute and jam, of course, comes journalism. And over the years, the output of the publishing houses in Dundee has become enormous. I'm very happy to say that in my own lifetime, they have provided my own sophisticated reading tastes.
During the last century, the emergence of the ubiquitous postcard was first to be seen from the publishing houses of Dundee. This, now familiar item, was just one of the extensive offshoots of a solidly established publishing industry in the city. From their headquarters in Dundee, the Thompsons, arguably the most famous publishing family in Britain, established a huge publishing empire that has impacted on every household in Britain over the last century or so. A cornerstone of which empire was the Dundee Courier, whose offices are seen in these early shots. The story behind D.C. Thompson and Company Limited is one of amazing success. It spreads over an amazing list of titles, from local daily newspapers like the Courier and the Evening Telegraph, to national such as the Weekly News and of course the Sunday Post, with those unforgettable cartoon-style strips of the Bruins and Oor Wullie, so ably created by Dudley Watkins. Teenage and picture magazines of all styles have appeared from time to time, some successful, some not, but few would not recognise the supremacy of the Beano and the Dandy as children's comic papers for more than half a century. These youngsters rushing out to sell newspapers on the street corners of the city would not have known such excitement. But for more recent generations, such comic weeklies as The Wizard, The Hotspur or The Rover for boys, Bunty and Others for girls, and Shout for young teenage girls, have been a catalyst of mind adventure for many thousands of children. Long-running periodicals such as The People's Friend, which has in recent years celebrated its 125th anniversary, and The Scots Magazine, founded in 1739, and the world's oldest popular magazine, are two stable companions of this extraordinary publishing company. This rare footage captures Mr. D.C. Thompson himself arriving at the courier offices. Whatever news events, either here in Dundee or in the far-flung corners of the world, the readership could always rely on a well-written and well-produced product that was interesting, informative and entertaining. Many might remember the story behind this event in the Dundee of 1938, when Imperial Airways tried to capture the long-distance record with their two pick-a-back seaplanes, Maya and Mercury. There will be few, though, who will be able to remember moments from these Dundee street scenes, which were shot a few years before the Great War. This was a Dundee that was to change dramatically in the coming decades. The Great War, however, brought desperate news of events in France for the media to cover. One such event was to become known as Dundee's Flodden. On the 25th of September 1915, the Battle of Lewes decimated the 4th Battalion of the Black Watch, which was recruited locally and popularly known as Dundee's Aim. There was scarcely a family that was not touched by this great tragedy, in which so many of the young men of the city and surrounding district lost their lives. It was here that Piper Daniel Laidlaw, of the King's Own Scottish Borderers, won his Victoria Cross. Towards the end of the war, this tank was brought to the city in support of a drive to sell war bonds. And indeed, some £4.4 million was raised by the worthy citizens. This modern fighting technology was an awesome sight for the citizens of Dundee, but perhaps it was all too familiar for those Dundonian lads fighting in the trenches with the 4th Battalion of the Black Watch. Come up the River Tay a few miles, and we come to this magnificent castle of Balhousie, which is now the regimental museum of that most famous and illustrious of Highland regiments. Here in the museum are the tangible reminders of the history of the Black Watch. Many a Dundonian has served in many theatres of war, and in fact, not only the First World War, but greatly through the Second World War, the battalion was in almost every theatre of action. And many a Dundonian, unfortunately, has given the supreme sacrifice serving in the ranks of this fine regiment. The long military traditions of the 42nd Royal Highlanders, the Black Watch, and the City of Dundee continue to be maintained, and the regiment today still look to this part of Scotland for its recruitment. Some of these young army cadets, being reviewed by the Duke of Edinburgh in 1959, may well have gone on to serve in the gallant 43. The hard military life may not have been such a dramatic change for many of those who chose to join up. The appalling housing conditions, overcrowding and the difficulties in employment meant that for many, and especially for women and children, a hard and difficult life was by no means uncommon. As the jute industry boomed around the 1840s to the 1850s, Dundee experienced a consequential and dramatic increase in population. It came firstly from both the outlying areas and the highlands of Scotland, but the lure of steady work was soon attracting hundreds across from Ireland, and Dundee quickly found itself with a sizable Irish community that mostly settled in the growing suburb of Lochee, seen in these shots here. Dundonians still recall areas in this district as Tipperary and the Bogue. Redevelopment came to Dundee thick and fast, and by the mid-20th century, new homes were being erected on an enormous scale. This renewal of central and urban Dundee brought mixed blessings for some, but few can argue with the advances that were made, particularly for children. The majority of this redevelopment throughout the city had been completed by the construction of the Tay Road Bridge in 1966. Previously, the only way to cross the 1.5 miles of water to the south had been by rail or ferry. The first rail bridge was completed in 1878, but only 18 months after it was opened, on a bleak December night in 1879, it collapsed in a violent gale, taking with it a railway train and the lives of 75 passengers and crew, none of whom survived. The first real indication that a disaster had occurred was when a mailbag was washed up at Broughty Ferry some half an hour after the train had been due at Dundee, confirming the anxieties of station staff that the train was in the water. As a grey morning dawned, the full extent of the calamity became clear. The damage to the bridge was obvious, and of the train that had plunged to the bottom of the Tay, there was no sign. Some years later, the railway company began to build again, another and stouter rail bridge, but this time they built for safety beyond doubt. And so the mode of crossing continued until the coming of the road bridge. The waterfront had never seen such disruption. Many who had argued the merits or demerits of the old Royal Arch saw the old edifice swept away forever as the builders prepared the approach road network for the new bridge. Taking more than 3 years to complete, the task of spanning the Tay yet again met with many a problem. But eventually, by August 1966, Her Majesty the Queen Mother opened the new bridge with great ceremony, and Dundonians had a new reason to be proud of their city. These youngsters will have grown up in that period that saw the building of the road bridge across the Tay, and may well have benefited from the many effects it has had on the area. not only in the industrial base of the city, but also in the recreational side of people's lives. Not that Dundonians have ever been slow to appreciate the value of fun and recreation. Many a chiel and his lassie have spent time a-courting in the chummy seats at Green's Playhouse.
Green's Playhouse greets you and extends to you a most hearty welcome. In constructing the playhouse, every care has been taken to give Dundee a picture house of the very finest and in keeping with the traditions of this great city. We have endeavoured to incorporate everything that is possible to ensure the comfort of our patrons. The seating and carpeting were especially designed for the playhouse. Their colours blend and are in harmony with the general decorative scheme of the building. Even the lowest priced seats, with their deep, well-upholstered backs, have 12 springs. They are of the very latest construction and give an immediate feeling of comfort. There is seating accommodation for over 4,000 persons, and every seat has been carefully placed so that a clear view of the screen is obtained from any part of the house without the slightest strain. It is worthy of notice that the stalls area is not only the largest in Europe, but possibly the largest in the world. So that we shall live up to our famous slogan, "It's good, it's greens. It's greens, it's good." In conclusion, we have taken every care and spared no expense to make the playhouse not only Dundee's, but Britain's best cinema.
Football has of course played a dynamic role in the life of the city. Few, if any, of the players in this match of 1911 between Dundee and Raith Rovers would be still around to kick up the dust. Always popular with the citizens of Dundee was Broughty Ferry and its attractions, where people could relax and take the opportunity to get away from the hard labours of life in Dundee.
Dundee, and more so its people, have proved themselves time after time, over and over again, in whatever activity or endeavour they've undertaken. This very ship on which we stand took Captain Scott to the Antarctic, and it wouldn't have happened without the skills of Dundonians. It's been a very great pleasure of mine to present this video, and I hope it's been for you a voyage of discovery as well, and it's rightly so that this great city of Dundee has taken as its new name the City of Discovery. Thank you, everyone.